You know, if you've made it to this point in the lecture series, at least, involving paper two, I appreciate your dedication. It's good to have you here, and I really hope that these things have been helpful. In our last installment, we removed Richard Wright from the rural South. We dropped him in the urban North, Chicago in particular. And although he found out that things were different and there was an idea, at least, of freedom that existed in Chicago, it wasn't as free as everybody in the South had made it out to be, and as free as he would like to have believed it was before he made that move, okay? Today, what I want to talk about in this final installment is what you might think of as civil rights activism, okay? And you're going to see him engage in civil rights activism throughout the course of this installment. Now, I know what you're thinking. When most of us think about civil rights and civil rights activism, we think of the 1950s and the 1960s, okay? We think of the Montgomery bus boycott, and we think of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, okay? Now, that's not wrong, it's right, but it ignores some of the activism that occurred and in many ways laid a foundation for later activists in the 50s, 60s, and beyond to kind of build upon once that movement hit its stride. There's this idea among historians, professional historians is what I mean, referred to as the long civil rights movement. And what it argues is that this activism that was occurring in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and into the 1950s is very much a part of the civil rights movement, and we need to focus more on that to get a full picture of civil rights activism in American history, okay? Good news here is Richard Wright is going to give us lots of opportunities to do exactly that. Now, in the 1930s and 1940s, I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to come back to it at least one more time. The only predominantly white organization that was even cognizant, even remotely aware of the lack of civil rights, racism generally speaking, that was the American Communist Party. Now, leftists, including the communists, understood civil rights as an issue, and they understood the connection that it had to the bigger, broader society. They understood it as a tool, racism that is, that was essentially used by the people that own the factories and the people that own the other means of production to keep everybody, poor white people and also people of color, unanimously down, okay? And that was one of the major reasons that they took up civil rights as this cause. This is a very important story in American history, and in my own humble opinion, one that doesn't get enough attention, okay? Let me give you a quick example. In 1932, there are 9 African-American youths. They're literally boys. And they're riding trains in Scottsboro, Alabama. This was pretty common, going from town to town as a stowaway on a train, looking for greener pastures. All kinds of people did it. It was pretty, normal, okay? What was not normal is when the train stopped, 2 white girls who happened to be on the train with them reported that these 9 black boys raped them. Now, again, this is 1932, and it's Alabama. The penalty for rape is basically death. And that's if you're lucky enough to get a trial. There are thousands of black people that were lynched, assassinated, murdered simply for being accused of that crime. And by the way, that crime was far more broadly interpreted than what you're thinking of it right now, okay? In any case, if you recall me talking about this example, it was the Communist Party, the International Labor Defender, to be clear, the legal wing of the Communist Party that sent lawyers to defend these Scottsboro boys in Alabama, okay? Wright points out these examples from time to time throughout his book as well, okay? And that's where I want to begin our conversation. In particular, I want you to open up to let's start over. I want you to open up to chapter 16, which happens to be on page 271, okay? Page 271. Now, it's several pages into chapter 16, but it's a paragraph that starts out, I was now convinced. I'll let you find that. Several paragraphs in, it's a paragraph that starts out, I was now convinced that they did not know the complex nature of Negro life. This is an example that he's going to use where these white radicals, in this case communists, their hearts were in the right place and that they saw the lack of civil rights, but they essentially were not listening, okay? That they needed to do a better job of listening and not assume that they knew the African American people the way that they thought they did, okay? I was now convinced that they did not know the complex nature of Negro life, did not know how great was the task to which they had set themselves. They had rejected the state of things as they were, and they seemed to me to be the first step toward embracing a creative attitude toward life. I felt that it was not until one wanted the world to be different that one could look at the world with will and emotion. But these men had rejected what was before their eyes without quite knowing what they had rejected and why. He goes on. I felt that the Negro could not live a full human life under the conditions imposed upon him by America. And I felt, too, that America, for different reasons, could not live a full human life. It seemed to me then that if the Negro solved his problem, he would be solving an infinitely more than his problem alone. I felt certain that the Negro could never solve his problem until the deeper problem of American civilization had been faced and solved. And because the Negro was the most cast out of all the outcast people in America, I felt that no other group in America could tackle this problem of what our American lives meant so well as the Negro could. Okay? I think what he's trying to say there, whether this is conscious or not conscious, the white radicals that are engaging in civil rights activism, and in many cases running around in the same circles as their black counterparts, they're not listening to their black counterparts. It's a form of white supremacy. And here's what I mean. It's a situation with the dynamic where white people make the decisions, right? What to tackle with respect to activism, how it's to be tackled. People of color are expected to take orders. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not on the same level as things that we've talked about before. The woman that assumed he would never be a writer because she just couldn't envision Richard Wright being something important like a writer. I'm not saying that these people were open racists, but I'm also saying it's part and parcel for the way that we've described white supremacy and how we've seen it work in this class and certainly within the world of Richard Wright, okay? There's another good example of this too. He's also kind of annoyed of the oversimplification that these radical whites seem to have when it comes to racism. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I want you to open up to chapter 18, and that would be page 320 of your book, okay? Now, it's several pages into chapter 18, but it's a paragraph that starts out, here then was something, find that paragraph. Here then was something that I could do, reveal, say. The communists, I felt, had oversimplified the experience of those whom they sought to lead. In their efforts to recruit masses, they had missed the meaning of the lives of the masses, had conceived of people in too abstract manner. I would make voyages, discoveries, explorations with words and try to put some of that meaning back. I would address my words to two groups. I would tell communists how common people felt, and I would tell common people of the self-sacrifice of communists who strove for unity among them. I think what he's trying to say there is that they're simply not listening. And he's trying to say, you've got this wrong. Again, your heart is in the right place, and we very much appreciate you acknowledging the racist society around us, but you've got these people wrong. And the reason that I know that is because these are my people, and I know them. I've got a very different perspective than you can, and we would all be better served if you listened and we came in at this in a collective way as opposed to the way that it's being done right now. Okay? Part of this, another really important aspect to understand about this, there's a context with this. And this is a context that involves the John Reed Club. Okay? Now, again, what the John Reed Club was the cultural wing of the Communist Party. What the communists understood was, plays, skits, songs, poems, and certainly books like Richard Wright wrote were way, way more effective of explaining what the problem was, who the good guys were, who the bad guys were, and most importantly, what needs to be done and what should be done. Okay? It was a far more powerful vehicle than even the most refined political scientist or economist that would come lecture for hour after hour, only to have everyone go to sleep. So what the John Reed Club was designed to do was to convey messaging in the form of culture, mass culture in particular. Well, they recruit Richard Wright to be a part of this John Reed Club, and he's trying to convey all these ideas that he has. And he runs into this idea. In that particular time period, they called it Chauvanism, all right? I think what we would call this would be a form of white supremacy in the sense that it's a presumed concept that the white people have the best ideas and we should simply follow their lead. I think that that's the concept that he's attacking right there. I think what he's trying to say is if you listen to what we being the African Americans had to say, we might find better paths forward. And not only that, not every single thing needs to be the unquestioned party line. There can be some gray area, and we might have a better way forward if we looked at the gray area, okay? One final example that I want to leave you with, and I promise I'll connect this one to the class, to a lecture, okay? It's important that you understand, and my guess is many of you do understand, that these people, white communists, the white radicals that are involved in civil rights in Chicago, as well as activists like Richard Wright, they essentially want the same thing, but they have disagreements as to the best way to get there. To show you what I mean, I want you to open up to chapter 19, and this is going to be on page 336 of the book. Page 336, okay? This is an example of his conversation with a white communist about experiences of black communists like him. This paragraph on page 336 starts out, I talked with white communists. Find that paragraph. I talked with white communists about my experiences with black communists, and I could not make them understand what I was talking about. White communists had idolized all Negroes to the extent that they did not see the same Negroes I saw. And the more I tried to explain my ideas, the more they, too, began to suspect that I somehow was dreadfully wrong. Words lost their usual meanings, simple motives took on sinister colors, attitudes underwent quick and startling transformations, ideas turned into opposites while you were talking to a person you thought you knew. I began to feel an emotional isolation that I had not known in the depths of the hate-ridden South. I think he's really expressing some frustration there. in that these are supposed allies. But because the system of white supremacy pretty much assumes that white should be playing a leading role, there's no way to explain to them, you've got this all wrong. I can tell you you've got this wrong, okay? The connection that I want you to think about in our class is going to come a little bit later. It's not going to be the 1930s or even the 1940s or 50s. It's going to come to you in the 1960s, okay? In 1963, Martin Luther King, one of the most famous activists of the civil rights movement, is going to be arrested in Birmingham, Alabama for protesting. He's going to be sent to the jailhouse in Birmingham. And it's going to be there that he's going to author one of the most important documents of the entire civil rights movement. It's entitled The Letter from the Birmingham Jail. As a matter of fact, we had to read about this in one of our chapters. For those of you that remember, the letter from the Birmingham Jail was not a stinging critique of Bull Connor, the chief of police in Birmingham. It didn't blast George Wallace, the one-time governor of the state that would later campaign for president on a segregationist platform. The people that Martin Luther King criticized in the letter from the Birmingham Jail was his white allies, in particular the white clergy, the white churches. You have to keep in mind that up until that point, what the white clergy had been saying was wait and be patient. Understand that Rome was not built in a day, and you cannot expect hearts and minds to change overnight. This is going to take time. And what Martin Luther King comes back with is so profound and so important, it's really going to encapsulate, the entirety of the civil rights movement. When you are haunted day and night by the simple fact that your skin color happens to be black, right? When you can clearly see inequalities and hypocrisies and double standards, and your very being is being evaluated based on your race, you can understand why we find it so difficult to wait. We can't wait. We've been waiting. We need progress. We need results right now. He's pushing back against his white allies. He's not criticizing the racist establishment. He's criticizing the people who, at least on paper, have professed to help him and bring about civil rights and equality in American life. Okay? So you can see that the examples that we've talked about here today have a connection to the things that we've talked about in the course broadly defined. Okay? So I hope that these videos have been helpful. I hope that they have helped you see the connections between white supremacy and how it functions, how it's a system, right? How it's not necessarily a collection of individuals, that it's a system that places white people at the pinnacle and it goes down thereafter. I'm hopeful that you can see how those connections intersect with some of the things that Richard Wright had to say. Very tangible, and I might say relatable examples in Richard Wright. On an aside, I'm also hopeful that this helps you understand how we got to the here and now with respect to American race relations. How and why, when you turn on the news and there are reports of racial violence or the way that various communities are policed or not policed, how and why that is really, really an important matter. As I told you on the first day of class, if you don't have a historical context, you can't understand the here and now. And so I'm very hopeful that Richard Wright's story and our conversations like this have helped you understand the world in which we live in today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this installment and this series. I hope they have been helpful. And you know how to get a hold of me if you need me.